Welcome to Fireside Chat number 21. As usual, we pick a topic just before we start the chat, and then we express our opinions. We used to have these kind of chats in person, and we felt that it'll be useful for us to record them and have others listen to them as well. As usual, if you like these, then please leave us comments, leave us feedback, and inspiration for some new topics that you would like us to discuss, and also subscribe so that you're notified when we release the next one. So today we are going to talk about values. So as an organization, values are considered very important. Almost every company will tell you what their values are, at least, or sometimes they even have them on a poster and so on. But are values important for a software development team? Well, I'll let you in on a little secrets. They are. In fact, XP describes these values as well for teams, and they are not the only values that you can have, right? But how are they important, and how do we use them within the team? So that is the topic of our discussion today. So I'll pose the questions to yourselves. So, how are values important? Well, first of all, are they important, you think?
No, Mash. No, you shouldn't
All right,
be
we're done
talking
then.
about that. Is
They're not important. Yeah,
they're
we
not
write them
important.
down and we forget about them,
Exactly.
so they're not important.
Exactly.
They're just nice words to illustrate the wall. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I
exactly,
mean,
exactly.
yeah, I think
Decorate the wall.
everyone would agree that they are important, right? Like not only for software developer teams, but any kind of organization in general. No, but what I guess happens a lot of the time is that we tend to say, oh, this value or that value, and put a label on it, transparency, blah blah, right? And the thing is, the meaning attached to that label is quite different depending on who the person is, right? Like on what you think that means. Um, and so that's one aspect of being able to use values. So not everyone needs to be aligned around what they mean. And then there's another aspect around a how do you teach a value, yeah, or how do you kind of bring people to be aligned with that value. And there is these vagueness around it, that you need to do a big jump in order to be able to express that as something else, or to be able to use that as something else, especially if you're if you're coaching a team, or if you're trying to create some sort of culture, in that sense. So I think those are kind of problematic areas around whether you can use values effectively or not. No, they are important. Yes, they are important, but it only they are only important as you're able to use them, so to speak. No.
Well, before we even go down to using them, Sandro, maybe that's something you can you can talk about. Is we are saying they are important, but why? Before we talk about the how we use them,
All
why
right.
are they important?
So, yeah, you just took what I would say, because, like, yeah, we find them important. I just question sometimes how useful they are, because, like, there is yeah, it's important, but can we make them useful, right? But I will go back to that point later, as you asked, Mesh. So why they are important? Well, what are we trying to achieve establishing those values? I think that, from my view, when we talk about values and try to define them, we are trying to resolve a few uh, issues. Let's say we are trying to uh, give a direction. So when people don't know exactly what to do because it's not very well prescribed, they can go back to the values and say, like, how can I choose what to do? So I would need to choose something that would be within those values, right? They don't need to have a prescription of how to behave in every single situation, but they can figure out what they need to do as long as they are aligned to those values. So that's one of the things that we might be trying to do when we define that. We also try to define a common understanding, common behavior, kind of a culture. When you talk about culture, it's all about values, behaviors, and we expect people to respect those kind of things, or to share, not only respect, but also to share that kind of understanding, and that would enable them to coexist. Coexist is an interesting word, but like to be able to work together in a working
not grab each other's throats.
Yeah, so I think that's what you're trying to do when you talk about establishing values, or that.
I think
I
there's.
think. Sorry, go on, Jose. Yeah.
No, I think there is an expectation setting around it. No, the same way that you're kind of putting forward a direction, or a guideline, so to speak, no, on what you think certain behaviors, to what you think certain behaviors should be aligned to, right? I think there's an expectation setting aspect to it as well, right? And this is, when you talked about coexisting, I feel like that is part of the coexisting aspect. I know where you're coming. We understand each other and what kind of things we're expecting, no, and then we can adapt to that. Now that we understand those the different points of view, so there is that expectation setting as well. I feel like it's why they are important, and they allow you also to choose what not to do, no, so the same way that if you're looking for a new company to work in, you're interested in what kind of values, what kind of, because sort of what to expect and whether that is aligned to what you want. Because we were talking about values in the context of a team or an organization, but we all have personal values. We all have things that we like or we are aligned with, no, and when you get that alignment at all levels, you're just more fulfilled, no. So choosing and helping you choose is also another aspect of it.
I think choosing is a very important aspect, actually, because I find that values help you have a much more objective discussion. So you can take the feelings out of it, right? So in Ken Beck's book, he talks about, there's an example he provides in XP Explained. He talks about like someone who doesn't want to do estimates in the team, right? And he talks about, well, okay, so someone says, you know what, I don't want to do #no estimates, right? So then
There's another
then
fireside chat there, right? By the way.
#no estimates. Write it down, right? So then, well, how do you discuss that with the person? Initially that might be because they read something, or it's just that the way they feel. But actually, he talks about like boiling it down to why that person may not want to do estimates. And in this case, they might, for example, say that I don't want to provide estimates because I don't want to be committed to that, and I don't want to be held to that because I'm not 100% sure, right? And this is so then they are, in a way, you can then start talking about, okay, well, you're valuing kind of self-preservation, right, in one way, if that's the reason that you're using, right? The other thing that you can well, they can say is that I want to provide estimates even though they're not exactly accurate. And of course there are other things, but I value transparency. I might have an idea of like how big this thing might be, and I want to make sure that others are aware, because I value transparency, because then from there better decisions can be made, or that kind of thing. And there are other values, of course, that I'm not saying one is right, the other one is wrong, but you can boil it down towards those values. And at that point you can then start discussing in a bit more objective way, right, why you are arguing for, like in this case, estimates, and or against the estimates, right? So values kind of help you understand the root cause, and I believe this is the word that Ken Beck uses as well, of the things that you do like or that you don't like, right? So they help you understand the root cause and communicate that root cause, and help you align at that level with the other members of your team, and that helps you choose, right? That helps you have a
Yes.
better discussion.
So I find values way too vague. I think that values are things that when you try to put into practice, they are very difficult to disagree with. So, for example, it takes a very special kind of person to say, I don't value respect, right? Or I don't value transparency, or I don't value. So, most people will agree, yes, respect is a good value, transparency is a good value, and things like that, until it's not. Until, for example, they will favor one value over the other. As you said, Mesh, you gave a very concrete example. I value transparency as long as it doesn't put me into an uncomfortable position where I'm going to give a number in order to provide transparency, but I'm going to be held accountable to that. So then I will provide a half transparency. So because you are now mitigating, or for example, respect is a very complicated one. Is respect is good. Like, of course, we should respect each other until we have very conflicting points of view in how we should move forward. So then we need to resolve that. Yes, the respecting, I can listen to you, but I still need to move forward and maybe live with a decision that I'm not happy with. So at some point, I will still be respectful to you, but that doesn't mean that we will need to resolve that conflict. And this is why I think that although values are very important to discuss on a high level, they are more useful when someone really go against them. Like in the respect, like someone was really aggressive towards the other person, really crossed lines. Then you can use the value at that very high level, right? Or transparency, like someone lied about the current state of the project. That is a clear crossing the line. Yeah. But quite often, the day-to-day operation of a team, they are for me too high level to be actionable in a lot of the small things that we have.
So they are, yeah, and one can argue that when it comes to these stark things, like, someone lied, right? They go something against fundamental values that we believe as almost kind of human beings to some level, right? And kind of it's a bit useless to have values for a team then, because those stark kind of things, those things are right or wrong with given some level of ambiguity. But the really important part is when certain opinions are expressed that they are conflicting, and how you reach the how do you reach alignment. And I think you raised a very important point. Values are vague, um, but it's how you understand them, and also to a point where how you can actually articulate the concrete scenario with the values. But I think there is another important point in there, that a particular value doesn't exist in isolation, right? And this is why it's quite important as a team to choose a set of values that actually calibrate with each other, right? Now, uh, ideally, what you want to do is to take a course of action that kind of resolves or reaches a good compromise between all those different values. Or you may even have to prioritize as a team to say, that when certain things come and they say, well, actually, we're talking about self-preservation, or I don't know, maybe we're talking about psychological safety or something, um, and against the value of transparency. And in this case, which one, as a team, are we going to prioritize, right? So that also, I think, takes you back towards a more objective point of view, and takes like kind of my opinion versus your opinion type, lightens that, and takes the focus towards a bit more objective thing. I totally agree with you, they're vague, and we can talk about that later on, how you take a concrete scenario and how do you map that onto a value, and even more difficult, how you take a set of values and go towards kind of concrete scenarios that the team agreements should be based on, that kind of thing, right?
I partially agree with that, because although they're vague, you can sort of make them specific by providing examples. So one exercise that I like to do with teams is this is coming from coaching and so on. It's called a DPA, a Design Partnership Agreement. It's sort of like a working agreements, but at a higher level. Yeah. So it's not about, oh, we're going to be doing the dailies at this time, or we all agree with this. Yes, it creates a framework around the team, so that then you can have sort of like an anchor point, and when things go badly, you can always go back to that, right? And when we do that exercise, part of that is that vision part of things, like what kind of relationship we want to create. No, and it's aspirational to some extent. No, we want to have respect. We're like, we are giving these things for granted, but we put them there because it is what we are expecting from us working as a team and so on. So there's this aspirational aspect of that, even if it's vague. Yeah. Then you can make it a bit more concrete, because there are certain, you mentioned respect, transparency, so on. There are certain things that are too vague. So we should probably give some examples of what we are expecting. What kind of behaviors would that be okay? Would this not be okay? And kind of there's an aspect there around getting the team or the group that you're working with to agree on what that means. This is the other part, right? Like, if we haven't had this conversation before, everyone has something in their mind, and you're kind of, everyone's talking about a different thing. But the minute that you start making it a bit more, examples based, no, then people can make a picture, no, in their head around what it is that we're talking about. And then there's the aspect of setting expectations that I mentioned before, as in, we've discussed this. So when something happens that I don't feel comfortable with, because I don't think it's aligned with what we discussed, I can then go and bring it up, because we discussed this. We all agreed that we wanted this kind of stuff for us as a team. And I feel like it's not happening, so I want to talk about it. And then you're giving people the green light to sort of like have those difficult conversations or whatever, and do it within a framework that will help you. So although they are big, you can still kind of make them a bit more concrete to be useful enough. No.
This is where I think that you need to go a few levels down, because like I see, as you were speaking, like I see, for example, there are values at a very, very high level, a bit fuzzy in a way. Then there are levels, and they need to start getting more concrete, right? So, for example, there are behaviors that probably will be derived from those values, but people might behave differently and still think that they are compliant with those values, because their interpretation is different. So an agreement in certain behaviors are also important, but then you need to go into, you bring down the level of detail, let's say, so you come down a bit, because as I said, I don't think that people, most of the time, they are trying to be evil or taking advantage and stuff. It's just like they feel that they are in alignment with those high level values. It's just so and that's where you have a lot of conflicts, right? So everyone is trying to do a good job. We just don't know, we haven't decided what a good job really means, right? And so then you need to come down a few levels for certain things that are behaviors, and even lower level than behaviors, there are proper agreements, because there are times that there's no amount of respect that you make me, because for example, one thing is for me to respect the preferences of someone else. That doesn't mean that by respecting the preferences of someone else will make me behave like that person, or agree to have the same behavior, or even values from that person. I just respect those preferences, that way that the person wants to be. But that alone will not make us work in the same way. So then we need an even lower level of agreements, like regardless of what we think, like we need to find a way to work together here, regardless of our preferences. And for this very specific scenario here, that's how we're going to do things. And we need to figure out a way to, if we cannot get to that decision among ourselves, someone else will need to come and say, you know what, as you cannot resolve that, that's going to be resolved for you. But see what I'm saying? So, and that doesn't mean that those two people are evil or are trying to sabotage the project. No, they just have a different preferences and interpretations of those things. So you need a low-level agreement.
You wanted to say something, Matt, or
Yeah, I mean, I can. I think XP tries to solve exactly the same problem as with principles in the middle, right? So, for just taking an example in XP, you got practice, which is, let's say, test-driven development, yeah, and you've got values, right? So it has like things like respect, courage, communication, those kind of values, right? They don't lead to directly to test-driven development. And actually, you can talk about testing and development, and you can talk about communication, and you can say, well, how does then? Yeah, I'm kind of communicating through my tests and so on. But then there are principles that sit in the middle. The principles are like, for example, in XP, if you look at principles, values are like high level things. They are very much, they can be anything. They can be related to any concept. Like we talk about courage, we got to talk about transparency. They're as important in software development as they are in any other profession or in your normal life. Yeah. Whereas principles are actually more about the thing that teams activities, goals, whatever you may want to call them, its ways of working, right? So then you can talk about, well, fast feedback is kind of sits in between the value of communication, amongst other things, and the practice of test-driven development, right? And that's one of the reasons that you might want to say, well, okay, I value test-driven development because I value fast feedback, which is a principle, because actually the core value that this is underpins is communication, right? So you can start bringing these things together. It's the same thing as the hierarchy that you're kind of presenting, like the break that you're presenting, where it doesn't have to be principles, as you said. It can be behaviors, it can be like practices or higher level objectives and so on, that you agreements and so on. So you can create this link between kind of a bit more general behaviors or agreements that are very, very relevant to the work that your team does, and then that kind of is underpinned by the more universal values. So the idea is that values are something you should not be arguing about. Like, you don't argue about transparency, you don't argue about respect. Those are not the things. They are like, you find natural alignment amongst the people. Whereas actually the things that you really start arguing about is the practices, the things that you
yeah.
do, but you can move them up towards behaviors, and you find more ground for agreement, which you can take all the way towards values to kind of really establish the root of that agreement.
Yeah, there's this, if you have the alignment in values, yeah, a lot of the time the disagreement comes from the implementation of that, or what strategy you're pursuing in order to achieve the desired outcome and so on. And this is interesting. I don't know if you've heard of this, or this thing called the competing values framework. And there are values that they can be initially opposite to each other. No, and in this case of this framework, you have on one side you have externally focused or client focused versus internally or team focused. No, right? So those apparently could be, there's tension there, right? Like the client is always right versus we need to take care of our people. That's no, that comes out often, right? Then you have things like flexibility, and we need to be process driven, we need to be we need to standardize, so we need to have control over what is happening, right? Flexibility and control. Now we agree that we need those, right? Like you don't run a company or a team
I
or
think,
whatever.
I think it will be like flexibility and predictability. That probably
No, in the
right.
framework, it's more about flexibility and control, because the flexibility
Right.
in this case is around being able to change things and try things out and so on,
Right.
versus control and okay, how are things going? Like if you, let's say, if flexibility taken to the extreme, we come
I
here
was just
today.
like struggling to find control as a value, but I could say predictability as a value. I was just like, it's just the wording.
Okay,
but
sure.
I
You
now
can use,
understand what you mean
you
by
understand
that.
what I mean, right? Like,
Now,
it's
now
like
I understand. Yes.
we go
Yeah.
and work on a project, no, and hey,
Mhm.
we need to go, yeah, there, perfect, like do whatever you want, and then today, you come and you're working on a feature here, or you're trying this, spike and this experiment, and then tomorrow I come and ask, hey, what's up? How are things? No, and you're like, oh no, yesterday I tried this, and then like, okay, but where are we? Are we anywhere? Are we near to the?
How much more money do I need to spend
Exactly,
to get
or
something
whatever.
useful here, right?
Exactly, no, or other things. So there needs to be a balance. I do, we do want to explore it. We do want to, no, but there's also this, predictability, as you're calling it, no, that we need to have certain, control around what is happening, right, and how we're progressing and how we are, right, and those things are kind of against each other. Now you need all of those. You need to take care of people, but you also need to take care of the client. You need to, you need flexibility and innovation and creativity and so on, but you also need, some sort of standardization and rigidity in order to support what you're doing in the organization, right? Now you need all of those. How do you make it work? No, and it's in the strategy. And I feel like there's an aspect of values that we haven't discussed yet, which is the role of leaders in let's say bridging the gap between those values and helping people, let's call it, align around a strategy that sort of fulfills all of the needs, right? In that sense, I don't know, what do you think?
So kind of like a leader that can resolve the gray areas. Is that what you're saying? For example, like
Help people bridge that gap, right? Like they are in principle opposite, no, to each other, and you're trying to find a balance between the two, right? And I
Mhm.
feel like there's a role to be played there.
It's actually in anything, not just a leader, but anyone who has experience or has achieved a certain level of mastery, even in certain things, that can help you resolve the different competing values, right? Uh, we, for example, our own values as Codurance, right? We've got professionalism, pragmatism, excellence, and effectiveness. I had to look that one up. But if we talk about, like, there are some of them that really compete with each other, and we talk about this all the time. We talk about it as part of even the software craftsmanship movement as well, right? Especially the competing values of excellence and pragmatism, right? They do compete with each other a lot, and it's not a coincidence that they are the two of the four values within our company as well. Because from a excellence point of view, you want to have the most amazing solution, right? From your perspective. But from a pragmatism point of view, what you want to do is find the best trade-off, right? And that doesn't always lead to excellence from your point of view. In fact, we were doing the onboarding thing, and we were talking about values. This is one of the reasons we're talking about values today is, and they asked, one of the things we have in pragmatism is about empathy, like practice empathy. And so, well, why is empathy in pragmatism? I was telling them, well, this is how I see empathy. Empathy is, to me, about perspectives. Is looking at all the different perspectives, putting yourself in the shoes of the customer, in the shoes of the team member, in the every single stakeholder, and finding the right or the best or optimal path through all these competing uh, viewpoints, right? And to me, that is pragmatism, right? And it kind of relates quite closely to empathy as well, because you're putting yourself in through all those perspectives to find the right trade-off, and not the one that you are the most biased towards, again leading to kind of excellence and those kind of things.
Can I because this is like the pragmatism versus excellence is a topic that happens everywhere, and it took me years to really be able to resolve that conflict in my head and advise some of our teams. And because what you're saying, Mash, is always true. Like some people want to strive for excellence, and then they want to create the best solution possible. But not always that's what we need in that case, or we don't have infinite money or time. And quite often, pragmatism is used as a way to justify cutting corners as well, because that's another problem. So then you have a problem that excellence becomes unbounded. So people are chasing excellence forever and don't deliver anything. Or they say, no, we need to be pragmatic. That means let's do some shit job and get it done quickly, cutting corners. So resolving that, even within the craftsmanship community, was something that I struggled for years. And now I finally think I understand what it means. Like the way that I've been explaining this is, you need to provide a solution and you understand the context and you analyze all the different constraints that you have in that context. And time and money are two very valid constraints, right? So within the constraints that you have, that could be even regulatory constraints or even skills, or that you need to release things faster. So it's time. So then, given the constraints we have, or you have like you are committed to certain technologies or platforms or things like that. So given the constraints that you cannot change, what is the best possible solution you can create? So that understanding of those constraints is where pragmatism exists. So what is the best solution that I can create? So the pragmatism will create the boundaries where excellence can thrive. But excellence is bounded by a pragmatic solution. That's how I've been describing that more recently.
It's another way of describing the various perspectives, because actually the way I look at pragmatism is finding the best trade-off. And it's about trade-offs, right? It's not about like the word kind of, or the phrase trade-off is all about, I'm gonna give something up or a little of something up to gain a little of something else. But it is about that balance, right? So in fact, there are a number of balancing forces, or these, this is competing values again, right? These are a number of balancing forces that you have to find the right path through, right? And that is pragmatism. And it's the same concept described in a different way. Is that you have to go towards that balance. You can, and taking one value over the other can actually make you can optimize towards that without then considering other aspects.
It just made me think that as you are prioritizing one value over the other, that becomes a constraint. You are just tweaking the constraints. For example, I will prioritize delivering or getting value earlier than having a perfect solution later, right? So, or an optimal solution a bit later. And as you change your priorities or you rejuggle those values or resolve those conflicts given that specific context, because that prioritization across values are also context dependent. You might have a different prioritization in a different context. So that is always creating, that's what I was describing as your constraints, as those are the constraints that I have, or the preference that I have. And within that, what is the best I can do?
Yeah.
Right.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I see it in a very similar way. Again, it's a trade-off. It is, if you go to the extreme of any one of them, I actually don't see it as prioritizing one over the other. I feel like a lot of the time it's about finding the right strategy for both things to be accomplished, and it's also about trusting the solution. Because you mentioned something there. No, it's like pragmatism is used to justify cutting corners, right? The whole, we'll do it better, and in the next iteration we will come back to this, but we never come back to it, right? So it's really hard then for someone to say, hey, yeah, okay, let's do this solution that works, and then we'll come back and revisit it, if they think they're never going to come back and revisit it. No,
yeah, just add another item to our technical backlog. Yeah, just add to our technical backlog. We're gonna get to it at some point.
And again, so there are many, there are many nuances, no, to every context there. But overall, I feel like there is, again, an aspect of communication, of knowledge, as you mentioned, of mastery as well, to be able to understand that there are many solutions, not just the one solution that you prefer. I feel like this is one of the reasons when we talked about specialism, and I feel like having that broader view allows you to find those trade-offs a lot easier, because you understand what else is possible, and
you have many perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. You have other points, exactly, other perspectives to look at it from. So it is, it's the way it is. I'm gonna just, so how can someone who's in a team be able to do, what can someone do to kind of help in that sense, right? Like if you're in a team and you're finding these issues, for instance, or you clearly have some sort of disalignment with something that is happening there around the values, like what do you think is possible for someone?
I can.
No, you go. No, you go.
Yeah. Well,
gives me more time to think.
Yeah, good idea. Well, like the first thing that comes to my mind is that it's important that you have values. Yeah, and you don't have to come up with them yourself, right? So XP values are a good starting point. And even the XP values doesn't talk about only having those values. You can have your own values, right? So I think as a team, start with a good set of known values if you are struggling to create your own set, but start with them. Have a discussion about them, various scenarios, and what they mean to you, right? And then, of course, the more senior members in the team, or even ask for other people to come into the team to help you understand how those values then kind of translate to even principles or behaviors, as Sandro was talking about, and the practices or the agreements that you have adopted, right? So kind of keep those agreements and those values well and kind of documented, at least that these are our values. And then when you are discussing your approaches, when you are discussing changes to the behavior or additional behaviors, when you are discussing conflicts within the team or problems and issues, bring the values into the discussion. And this constant dialogue going back towards the values, in towards practices and current ways of working and conflicts and issues and so on, back towards the values, this kind of creates a knowledge base or a kind of alignment within the team towards those values. And if you find that those are not enough, feel free to keep evolving them, right? But start from something and have those values. Do not kind of just have discussions based on practices alone, because if you do these things, you can do them to you can justify any practice, really. So, and have that kind of framework within your team to start with and evolve with. That's I don't know if I answered the question.
You know that I will go back to the question, but like before, normally we tend to extract behaviors and agreements from the values. We go kind of top down. So, hey, we have those set of values. And then when things are not very clear, we need a little bit more prescriptions. Okay, so this is what we mean by respect or transparency or stuff. And we start become a bit more specific in how we do those things. And then we get even more details and start, well, yeah, we agreed that we would test drive everything we do, or we're going to have a backlog, or we do demos or whatever, right? So we start extracting much more lower level practices and things like that. Quite often we lose sight of the values. And as you were saying, Ash, I was just like thinking sometimes like we end up adding practices and agreements. Maybe at some point was aligned, but then our interpretation changed, and then we can go back and say, okay, is this practice that we use or this behavior, is this still aligned? You know, you can, because like sometimes people propose things and they forget about those values and they just propose different ways of working. And at some point, maybe the team end up agreeing with that, or at least the majority agreed, and then you end up implementing because the majority agreed. But at some point, the values serve also to question certain practice that might not be beneficial anymore. We see that
especially
a lot in
certain
Agile.
scenarios in particular. Practices may be a bit more difficult because, you know, practices normally, if you adopt something, they tend to, there was some context where they've applied their line to some kind of value. And of course, but like even those, yeah, I totally agree. But particular scenarios, you know, that have happened, particular instances of behavior that has occurred within the team that, you know, you're discussing in a retrospective, for example, right? You know, someone was always refactoring, and consequently, we couldn't really get everything done for that sprint. And now we are discussing that in the team, and that one person is like saying, "Oh, you know what? We are constantly slowing down because we are not looking after this particular feature, and this is why we're trying to do it." And the other one is saying, "Actually, but then we didn't manage to get this feature out. Like we failed our current sprint goal." You know, so that kind of discussion, these kind of scenario can lead then back to a through practice, even principles, to the value. So that actually helps you question, you know, which one was right, which one was wrong.
Yeah, and going back to your question, Jose, there are many things that people can do, but it also depends on their own personalities and also how comfortable they feel doing those things. Uh, a natural thing to do is, well, natural to some people, certainly for me, is, for example, if I'm unhappy with something, I would not think twice to say, you know what, we need to have a conversation here. And either I will call an impromptu meeting, or I will use the retro that already has the template, so I can raise some of the issues. We already had a full fireside chat in retros, and that not always the things that we need to discuss are discussed in there or chosen. And then I may not necessarily want to wait for my subject to be discussed. But so one thing that we can do is, hey, I'm having a problem here, and I really would like to discuss that. And then you can choose how you do that. One, you can be more aggressive and say, hey, I think we have a problem and we're not doing well, and already start blaming the whole team and already create a resistance. Or, well, of course, it depends on the level of intimacy that we have with everyone as well, right? So, but another thing said, hey, I'm perceiving an issue here. There are a few things that I would like to share with you, because and I need some help, or I would like to clarify a few things. And then you can call that meeting. So the way you call it varies, depending on the intimacy, how comfortable you feel with that people. But you can always raise their hand. Some people, but what in the scenarios where people don't feel comfortable? There is a way, like establishing those behaviors. For example, there's common agreements. One of them could be anyone that feels that something is not going so well, they could call an impromptu meeting. So then it's expected that people do. So you keep the door open for someone to do. But as I said, people have different personalities, different dynamics, but that's what I would do. I would just call it, hey, we need to have a chat about it, and I will control that meeting. This is another thing. I will control the meeting. I will not just say, hey, that's the bomb. I think we have a problem. That's the bomb. Team, you resolve. I'm just telling you what the problem is. That's not what I would do. That's not what I think is efficient. If I feel that there is a problem, I will control that meeting. I will run that meeting with my team. Yeah, and that's what I think that people can do. Do you have any a different idea, Jose, when you ask that question? You are on mute, by the way.
Okay. No. That not a different idea. I feel like you can't change, other people. No, they need to change themselves. So it will be a lot harder just to try to push people towards a thing. What I would suggest is for people to uh, act in accordance to those values and call attention to when there are inconsistencies or where there are things that where they are not comfortable with. Which is sort of, this second part is similar to what you were saying. No, it's about, hey, I don't feel comfortable with this, because we already, by the way, you do need that framework around it. Like you do need that, let's have had that conversation before, no, around what it is that we want to achieve, together as a team. I think even before we start discussing any issues or misalignment, we should probably clarify that. Yeah. And then once you have that clarified, we can start saying, this or this is not aligned or whatever, right? If you don't have that, it's very difficult you never had the conversation. So basically, how are people going to know, right? Like you're just being frustrated, no? But you do need to call attention to where the consistencies are, and you do need to act in accordance to that, because you can act, you can control what you do, no, and the impact of those things. And then from there, maybe you can influence others, right? And I go back a couple of years back. I wanted to do TDD. I learned to do TDD, and then I did TDD in my project. You know what I mean? Like, and other people saw it, and they were like, "Why are you doing this? Like, why are you, writing twice the code? No, or whatever." But eventually, they saw the benefit on, hey, this broke. Oh, here's the issue, right? Let's fix it. Boom. Oh, that's fine. How can we, let's see, I'm not going to test everything, but I now want to, maybe this part here, could you lend me a hand on this or whatever, right? And it slowly you can influence by, controlling what you decide to do, right? But you also need to be very, there's a bit of let's call it self-control or self-awareness of, don't go into the, okay, I'm going to refactor, but I'm going to refactor forever. That's not, I did not spend every day just writing tests. You know what I mean? Like I was delivering features, and as part of delivering features, I was, introducing testing little by little. No, eventually I had a big coverage on the areas that I needed the coverage on. No, I did not go and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be, testing everything. And by the way, since I'm learning it now, it's going to be twice as slow as that's not how it went. No, there are plenty of things that you can do in order to minimize that friction. No, so that would be my suggestion. Start with yourself. Now, be the change you want to be.
Be the change you. Be the man in the mirror. Right?
Exactly.
So I had a slightly different take, and well, just a slightly different topic around this. So we've been talking about the team and the values directly, but like, is it a smell? So there are two questions here. Like, do we have a more fundamental problem when people are not really seeing eye to eye? And also, can we use values as part of our selection process? Because, for example, we discuss why we are establishing those values, right? So, but quite often, I've seen in a lot of organizations that they are reactive. So, for example, the company established some values, but not many people remember what they are. And then they hired a lot of people. Those people joined. And now we want to have those people to behave in a specific way. But now it's a bit too late, because you already hired people that might not be aligned to those things. So I was just wondering, like, when you talk about values, should it really be more a holistic take.
For the first part of your question, I'll do one more.
All
Which
right.
is,
Okay.
what do you do if there is a disalignment in values? Like very, very well disaligned. You know what I mean? Like it's something that you wouldn't. It's not.
Well,
You don't want in the culture or present at all. So that's one.
well, I think you answered your own question, right? Values are not something you can, as we talked about, they kind of have a bit of a universal meaning,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're not something you teach to people. People have them or they don't, right? It's some like coming into an organization, you don't like that's my point of view anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, but values are quite general. Like if someone does not value respect, right? I'd rather not hire them. And we can argue whether we can teach someone respect or not. But even if we can, it takes a long time. And, breaking those patterns is not going to be easy. So, but on the other hand, when you are in an interview process or when you are hiring people, you can't just ask them, do you value respect? They will say, yes, I do. You then have to look at the principles that and the practices that they adopt, right? You have to create scenarios and their responses to those scenarios. One of the reasons, for example, we do pair programming for people is that actually you put them in a scenario, and from their behavior and attitude and the way that they engage in with a pair, you can start understanding some of the things that they value or the way that they describe certain things. And that's why, like, even in the interviews, I prefer much more a debate, a discussion, than asking like a technical question that has a specific answer. It's these are the things that are indicators and they help you understand the kind of things a person may value. And if there is a smell there, then I think that's where you stop.
This is precisely what I would say, because you cannot just say, "Hey, we have this list of values here. Do you agree with them?"
Yeah,
Because you're not gonna get a no in there. If you get a no,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
right. So, and for me, this is exactly what you said, Mesh. Is you need to go down into the details, and the best way is you put scenarios. This is exactly what you said. Okay, let's say that you are hiring someone at a more senior level, and this person might have team leadership uh, responsibilities. Yeah. So that's okay. This person might join my organization, might lead a team in the next project. So then you start asking those questions. Okay, so let's say that we have pressure for delivery. So the client has a lot of pressure to delivery. We need to build things well. How would you deal with that situation? Or you have people that have conflicting ideas in what needs to be done or how it should be done and so on and so forth. How would you address that? Or if someone comes to you as a team lead, like someone as a team member, say, hey, this is the wrong direction. We had a chat with the team, and I don't think that this is a good way of going forward. How would you deal with that? Right? So how would you deal with bringing your team together? So you need to start putting those things in there. Someone says, hey, I'm unhappy with this. Or the client says, I'm unhappy with one of your team members. So you start stretching that and putting that person in certain situations. Like, how would they respond to that? And that depending on how they say that they would cope with that, or even better, if they ask more question, okay, because like a lot of those things, it's like, okay, you are painting a very simplistic scenario. Is there more things in this context? What about this, and that? So then you start thinking, okay, this person will analyze more perspectives before making a. See what I'm saying? So, but you need to describe situations and then see how the person reacts. Because just asking, yeah, do you value, as you said, Mesh, do you value respect and
That's
transparency?
still a hypothetical, and that's still a hypothetical. I would even prefer for them to tell me about a time with something like that happened before. Like, have you been in a team before where someone maybe was not performing well, what happened. No, not how did you deal with that situation, or because maybe they didn't. Maybe they decided to this is someone else's job, and that's it, right? So, uh, you can create a context. Maybe they haven't been in that context, and then they can venture to give an answer. But you can make up stuff. Like if I ask you about what happened in the past, then it's a different story. Because then, if you're not, if there's something that you don't want to tell me, I might notice. I may not notice as well, but there's probably you can read a little bit this kind of stuff, right? Or this is what happened. Like if you have to do it again. We're, by the way, this is turning into into a regroup.
I don't want to go. I don't want to go in that direction. And also, by no means, I also wanted to give the impression that you can verify that the person shared the same values in an interview process, because I don't think that is enough time to, as you said, Jose, there are many ways you can try to put a few scenarios or ask for previous experience and stuff, but you will not be able to be 100% certain that you probably will find the red flags, right? There might be a few telling, but the details, like if a person is a more reasonable,
they just don't have to say anything.
There is another element.
Wrong, you know what I mean?
There is another element in this scenario, is to make your own values explicit. Is that it's part of it is that person is also trying to understand whether they fit in your organization. And if you make your values explicit and you tell them about them, then they can all choose to say, yeah, my values align with theirs and I think I'll thrive there, or no, they don't, and I'll say thank you very much. So there's that element as well, because I think if when you make your values explicit and you disagree at that point, it takes someone quite misguided to say, well, our values don't align, but it's a job.
Yeah.
I think that's quite a small subset that would do that. Normally they would say, you know what, I don't think that job is
for me. Yeah. And I think that the teams are the same, right? So as the teams establish their own values and practices and behaviors and stuff, when they are trying to hire people to join their teams, mainly coming from outside the organization, they should factor those things in. They should understand, how do we work, how we like working, and would this new person be aligned to that? Or sometimes even like when the team is trying to move to a better way of working, the team said, hey, we would like to start working like that. Every new hire should be an ally, right? Someone that will help the team to go in that, and not another person that they need to convince to work in a different way, right? So I was just like bringing that, like how values can also help
it's
grow
very
the
interesting
team.
question, I think. Very interesting question.
Sorry.
Go on. No. Go on, Jose. I was just going to say we're nearly reaching our 60-minute marker. But go on. Are you going to bring up about another 30-minute topic?
Like I usually do. No, you already brought it up before. Like I guess my question was around, do you think that you can teach values? And if so, how? No? I have a particular point of view on that. I feel like in order to learn values, you need to experience them. It's really difficult for someone to learn the value if they're not able to live it, and although I agree that we bring our own values and so on, this is mostly based off the experiences that we've had in the past and so on. So the fact that someone has only been in context where, I don't know, people did not collaborate very well and so on, may not mean that they don't want to be good collaborator or good team player or whatever, right? They just haven't been in that context, so they don't know. Like if you ask someone what's the best team that you can imagine, what kind of attributes, what kind of characteristics or values does a team have, if you've never been in a team like that, it's difficult. Like you can maybe by this is I know what I don't want. No, you can sort of like extrapolate from there, but I feel like in order to teach it, it's not like it can't happen. It's just you need to leave them, right? And if it's something like you said, no, like how much effort do you want to spend on on teaching someone, respect, no, or so on. And there's also a willingness to it as well, right? Like this is not just, oh, I will teach you and it doesn't matter what you think or whatever, right? And these things are quite core, no, to the person, and they're difficult to change, but it does not mean there isn't a willingness or there isn't an opportunity to do that. That's my take on it.
I think that we need a combination of things. I agree with you that the way that other people behave, mainly the people leading that project, that team, that organization, has a big impact, right? So they see what is acceptable and what is not acceptable by the behavior of others, mainly when the people that you being new to organization, quite often you look at the people leading the organization more. Your peers will influence you, but not as much as the people above. So there is an element of that, but that takes time as well. I think that some people, well, for example, we have people from all different cultures joining our organization, not only country cultures, right? So different backgrounds, but also work culture as well, coming from different organizations that behave in different ways. Just a few people leading by example. This needs to happen, but not always is enough, because this person also needs to behave. So they can learn how people do certain things, but they are also expected to react fast, to contribute, to be engaged in a discussion. And they might not have had time yet to understand how people would do what this person is supposed to do. So sometimes having lower level agreements help to create that frame for that person. I think you need both. You need a good behavior culturally in terms of behaving according to the values, but having more specific guidelines in how to, what are the team agreements, what are the expected behaviors, help that person to fit in faster, or at least not to behave in a way, even unconsciously, in a way that they will upset some existing members of the team.
Yeah, those values need, even if they haven't experienced them, they need to be made explicit and they need to be explained. And a dialogue that happens, especially around conflicts and agreements, always need to map back and go back to those as well, so that people can understand and kind of anchor themselves in those values. So experience, but with awareness, I think is the right kind of approach.
All right. I guess we can close now, because that was the,
Yeah, we can wrap up
the
now.
topic.
Cool.
So, Mash.
All right. To wrap up.
Yeah. So, well, thank you very much. As usual, please leave us feedback, new topics, or what you thought of this particular discussion, or your own personal views as well. We put this out there on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. So tweet or, add your feedback or comments there as well. And as usual, subscribe as well, so you can be notified of the next episode. So with that, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye-bye.